Hey fans, I hope you're all enjoying the program tonight.
You will be a weapon. You will be a minister of death, praying for war.
If you're not inside, you are outside, okay?
Sir, I heard it was the best, sir.
It is the best.
The only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
All right, everyone, welcome back on this day of the eclipse. Today we have a third host, JP Snyder. JP didn't see the eclipse. Kyle, you did. So JP, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll let Kyle talk through what he saw today that was so life-changing.
Yeah, sure. So not a huge eclipse for me down here, but yeah, my name's JP. Grew up in Florida, spent 5 years on active duty as a logistics officer. So I'm a motor T guy by trade. And then I spent the last 4 years at a AI weapons detection startup called Zeroeyes. So I've sort of followed a little bit of a non-traditional path from the military, and I have my MBA from the University of Hawaii, Manoa.
Beautiful. Kyle, how was your eclipse?
It was pretty incredible. Not gonna lie. There was a lot of consternation today about the fact that it was going to be cloudy, and indeed it was cloudy, but it was kind of like scattered. It was still like heavily cloudy, but the clouds were like kind of thin, if this makes sense.
Yeah.
And so like I had like actually like really excellent views, because like there'd be like big breaks in the clouds, and you would like totally like see the sun and like the eclipse happening as it was like moving towards like the totality. And then it would like hide behind clouds for a little bit, but you'd still like kind of see it, then it would pop back out. And then when the actual like eclipse happened, I felt like it was like really cloudy actually when the actual eclipse happened, but you could like it 100% got like instantly dark. Like,
yeah,
I was kind of surprised at how like I thought it'd be like more gradual. It was like it was like a light switch went off. It got like instantly dark. And you could 100% perfectly see like the eclipse happening. And I thought it was kind of cloudy. So I was like, okay, this is kind of weird. Like I'm still like, but maybe I don't know. You could totally see it.
It was
yeah.
We sat here in Philly. We had a totally cloudy day. But that said, you could tell. I mean, it was like heavy overcast. Everyone is outside, but you could still tell when it was happening. It was dark. I mean, you saw all of a sudden it was like, wow, this is pretty dark. It wasn't total. It was I think like 90% coverage, but it was pretty cool to see it like actually go dark. JP, you were in bed in Hawaii.
Yeah, but it was funny seeing all the slacks in our sort of group message, because we're I guess like 50 or 60% remote, and so it's like, what did it look like in Kentucky and Florida and Philly, and so people were sort of posting their eclipse glasses as well.
Yeah,
so
it was wild. You'd like totally like see like the corona around the sun, and like everybody like freaked out and happening like it was.
You can't say that, Kyle. We're going to get moderated by YouTube.
For what? Saying if they freaked out?
No, you said there was a corona around the sun.
Oh, well, I mean, isn't that what it is?
That's what it is. I'm just saying, YouTube. I don't know. We're probably out of that, but YouTube. I think it still happens. You can like get, weird stuff on Instagram from that. But thankfully we're past that, I think. So if we are not showing up in YouTube or Spotify, now you know why. But today we want to bring JP in. He has some really interesting expertise and kind of seeing things from the front line of their startup Zeroeyes. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more, but also just want to have his perspective on some of the current events that we're going to discuss. So first, we're going to jump into what's currently happening with Ukraine aid in the House. It's kind of hung up, what's going on there and why we do not need it. Second, we're going to talk about the aftermath of the MGM Grand hack. Or I shouldn't even say hack, but the ransom that occurred to MGM about last year. Then we're going to jump into Truth Social and why we are all bulls on that. I'm kidding, of course. We have a nuanced take on that, though, that many of you may not may not expect. It may not actually be as terrible of an investment as some people say. But this is not investment advice, obviously. And then lastly, we're going to talk to JP and to Kyle about big tech versus startups and what vets who are getting out should consider. So this week, the house.
Before we jump into that, Wyatt, I do want to say something. One more thing.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I texted you about this, and I've texted a bunch of other people, but I don't think people fully understand the gravity of this situation. Tesla, I have a Tesla Model 3, cheapest one you can buy.
We know. We are aware. We see it all the time.
I know you're aware, but I want to make sure everybody who's listening to this
Subtle
understands
flex.
how insane it's not. It's like a $39,000 car. It's like it's not even that expensive. But they turned on the full self-driving capability in the car. Like they pushed an update to it, and they sent me emails like, "Hey, for a month you're going to have this capability." I'm like, "Okay," and I tried it out. I am like 100% convinced we are a lot closer to robo taxis than maybe I realized, because this car drove me everywhere.
Elon said it's happening October. He said the first robo taxi is coming out.
August 8th. Mark your calendars.
Like I told it to I pulled out of my driveway. I started driving. I put in like, go navigate me to the golf club. It's like 4 miles away, and it's like on a highway. You got to go through like a neighborhood, and you got to like, there's like complicated traffic situations going on. And the thing took me, it had zero problem doing it, and it navigated some like pretty like heavy traffic and like people on the street. Like it navigated like a ton of like different scenarios, like with no problem. And then I've been messing around there for the past 2 days. And so, yeah, I'm thinking robo taxis are like, they're not far away. Like,
JP, do you have a Tesla?
I don't, but even just thinking about it a little bit sort of more macro, being able to like think about explaining to your parents pushing a software update to your car.
I was trying to explain it to my 9-year-old today, and I was kind of like failing. She's like, "Well, how do they do it?" And I'm like, "Well, they do it with the car,
the internet,
and you can like change the memory." And
the question that I have coming up is like, when will a car company basically say like, "Hey, for super cheap, we'll give you like an analog car"? Like, I feel like there's an opening for someone like Hyundai or Kia, even like Ford, to be like, "Hey, do you want just the most basic car? Like you'll get like a backup camera and like nothing complex, and it'll cost you like 10 grand to get like a new Ford Ranger." But
I don't know, man.
It'll be basic. I don't know. I feel like I've thought that for a while. Like you can, because most cars are today like a new Lincoln Navigator.
Yeah, they're all, everything's super
140,000.
Yeah, you got to take that up with United Auto Workers, man. That's a pretty strong lobby.
That's also probably something to be said there. But yeah, I mean, like a brand new Lincoln Navigator is like $140,000. Like a typical suburban family SUV, right? Not typical, but like it's not a G-Wagon, right? I don't know.
But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because like I want to fully communicate to people that like I did not realize that the technology was like at this level. I thought it was still like very janky, and now I am convinced that we are a lot closer to this being like an everyday thing than most people realize. Yeah, and apparently, my car is almost 4 years old, so apparently this just had all this shit in it that you just had to like get the software right and it would work. So
right,
yeah, it's not a hardware issue.
Yeah, like it was incredible. It's just like between this and the eclipse, like I'm just emotionally drained. Like after the weekend, there's just been too much novel shit going on for someone with 3 kids. And
this is why you have the San Francisco background. You are a Bay Area man at heart, right?
Oh, I don't know about that, but
so, shout out to our friends.
I would live in California if the money was right. Like let's be real. Like it is a pretty cool place. Like there's no doubt. You and I have been talking about this.
Yes, we have been. We'll talk about that more on the pod once everything's final with where I will be working my actual job soon. But yes, could be California. Probably will be. But anyway, we will move now to the House is returning this week, and one of the bills they are set to take up is a bill that's already passed the Senate for Ukraine aid. It also has some aid to Israel and to Taiwan. The big issue is that Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, Republican, he has a lot of resistance in his own party, and he has a really, really delicate majority. If even a couple more Republicans were to resign and leave, the Democrats could take control of the House before the elections. That is a very real possibility. I think it is the most narrow majority right now in House history. So Mike Johnson needs to be very careful, or else he could risk losing his speakership. He could, upend. We all remember the chaos that happened to the last couple speakers' votes. And Mike Johnson, though, is also a supporter of Ukraine aid. He has said that it's a moral imperative to pass this. So why, we'll start with you, Kyle, and talk to JP. Why is it being held up? If the Speaker of the House says he likes it, if it's clearly something that's popular nationwide, except with a small group, why aren't we seeing this passage?
I mean, I think there's just a lot of the Republican Party has just decided that they're just not in support of this for a variety of reasons, and he's there's like a vocal but very small group of Republicans who basically don't want like who they represent basically think this is like not a good use of money. So,
and I will say it's mostly House Republicans. I mean, Republicans in the Senate.
It passed the Senate easily. So,
yeah.
But the House has like a 1-seat majority for like Republicans. Like they and then they have they can oust the speaker with like 1 vote. But I actually think it's more complicated now because Marjorie Taylor Greene says she wants to do that, but like she actually has to have support to do it. I think she can like call for his ouster, and then like
she just did, yeah, she did today, but
she doesn't have enough allies like they did with McCarthy to basically like follow through on the plan.
So what's going on? And JP, you could probably talk to this a little bit. What's the case for? I mean, obviously a lot of Americans are thinking, why do we need this aid package? I know JP, you have some thoughts about this and some opinions on this, but what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I guess it just comes back to like we sort of go back to early to mid 2022, right, when the first counteroffensive failed, and we saw that it became on the table is like, are we going to give the protections to Ukraine in the same way that we do to our NATO partners? And I just I think that you hit the nail on the head with it's an incredibly unpopular war in the U.S. I think we've grown a little bit tired of it, and I think that sort of as the American electorate moves closer to becoming a one-issue voter, it's just not something that a lot of House Republicans who may be on the ticket for re-election, it's not something that they want to stump on. And so I think that they're just it's sort of a bridge they're not willing to cross. However, there certainly are some of the more hawkish legislators in the House Republican chamber that are like really, like you said, they call it a moral imperative, right? But I think that once that package if it were to get passed, right, I think that's a little bit of a tip in the scale as well, that we're going to allow Ukraine to join NATO, and then right by the powers enumerated in I think it's like Title V, but then it becomes a question of like, are we going to send U.S. troops to defend NATO? And I think that's a wildly unpopular sentiment in America. And so I think that's sort of why a lot of these legislators don't really want to see this get through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely that piece like Kyle talked about. There's this piece of the electorate that feels very strongly, and I mean, we're now over 2 years into the conflict, right? Although it's as much as ever still going. It's kind of an odd war, right? There's not a lot of like decisive battles. It's kind of a trench warfare at this point. They're moving like, a few kilometers per month. Yeah. So, one interesting thing though has been that President Trump and President Biden haven't really had clear strategies on this for the past, few months. President Biden obviously said, I want this bill to be passed. Hasn't talked about it much recently. Maybe that's been overshadowed by Israel, but Trump has also not been super clear and honestly has been a lot more hawkish than like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz. And he's even said something about recently, he said we should give the Ukrainians aid and we should make it a loan, which is what Mike Johnson might go forward with. But it's been interesting that Trump has actually not been as dovish as some people on the right, the far right of the Republican Party. Where do you think this goes, Kyle?
I think it's going to get passed. I think it's going to get passed, but they're going to use them like parliamentary tricks to do it. I can't remember the name of it. Basically, in a way that it can't be blocked on the floor, and or they will do it with like a loan. Like they'll say it's a loan instead of a.
Yeah, that's what Trump has said. That's like the thing that he said, which is, like I said, it doesn't really pair with like what Marjorie Taylor Greene has been saying.
I personally think Republicans. I think there are a vast majority of them that would probably view this as if this were to like Ukraine were to basically like have some sort of like major strategic defeat. It would and it was because they didn't get weapons. The blame would not be on the White House. The blame would be on the people who blocked the weapons sales, and that would be the majority of Republicans. And they know it would hurt them in the election year at the end of this year.
Yeah,
I think who don't want to own that that they'll be able to basically get this through, but it's gonna be like very painful and like kind of at the last minute because there's gonna be a lot of arm twisting and people like seeing which way the wind blows on it.
Yeah, they'll attach it to some stuff. Yeah, I mean it is an interesting question, right? Of like political gamesmanship, which you hate to see with actual issues of foreign policy. I mean it gets to the question of like, what do voters actually care about, right? Do we as vets really care about foreign policy? What's going to win the election in November? I don't know. I mean, that's different every time, but a lot of the times.
If I was Trump, I think Trump would have a much stronger hand if like Ukraine was in a better position. Like if he were to actually think about it from like a governing perspective, like he'd be in a stronger position if like Ukraine like was not in danger of collapsing. So I think it's like in his best interest to like support it. But
yeah, well. We'll move on from that and watch this over the next week or so. Yeah, my bet would be that Mike Johnson does it, that some of the House Republicans kind of complain, but in the end they realize that it would be political suicide to try to oust the speaker. And it's a mess.
And then let a country fall.
Yeah, it's a mess in the House right now. I mean, plenty of people like Mike Gallagher left because they're just like, these people aren't serious. So moving on to the next. This crazy story that we all saw in real time last year with MGM, their systems all went down. People weren't really sure what was going on in Vegas. And people at the MGM thought that maybe their computers just broke, right? The people were having to be checked into their rooms manually. It was a huge mess. Come to find out, someone had hacked, or not even hacked, but someone had gained access and completely locked MGM out of their system. So JP, you're obviously in the physical space, but could you break down a little bit about what happened and some of the issues that come specifically regarding ransoms and why this is such a big, why you may or may not want to pay those?
Yeah, sure. So I think that sort of you got to start you need to start at the end, which is that casinos and gaming facilities sort of have an endless well when it comes to sort of physical security, anything that goes on inside the casino, right? Like they have a vested interest in making sure that casino or space is like a safe place for their customers to come and, spend their hard-earned dollars. So I think that when you look at it from that perspective, really some of the most technologically progressive and advanced companies sort of in America are certainly in the casino and entertainment space. So certainly wasn't due to a lack of spend, right, or a lack of budget, but it comes down to good security comes in layers, and no matter how much you're spending on your red team or your firewalling or any type of your sort of physical cybersecurity infrastructure, it comes down to that social engineering, right? And when we got to the root cause of how this hacker organization was able to get root access, right, it was through social engineering, right? So that they were able to find the critical vulnerability, right? The CV of the MGM infrastructure and their security posture, and they were able to basically spoof somebody's LinkedIn creds. And it goes back to, you're only as good as your sort of weakest side. And so it comes back to what is the training that's happening, even at the front desk counter, right? At that
Yeah.
hourly wage worker, like it's wild to me, right?
They just called them, and they just called in and said, "I am JP Snyder," and they were like, "Okay, what's your birthday?" And you're like,
Yeah,
June 5th.
I think a lot of people sometimes think that like hacking is some sort of like guy like on the computer like
in the Matrix. Yeah.
And it's like a good portion of it is social engineering and like phishing and seeing like who, because like the systems are like really good. Like it is tough to find and exploit software flaws or network vulnerabilities in like thinking like you're gonna like brute force it somehow, right? And like that stuff does exist, and there are people who do it and are very good. But like just the ability to like get your way into like a system that you're not supposed to have access to, and then exploit the because like they have like like the first line of defense, second line of defense, third line of defense, right? And like when you think about like controls right around like cybersecurity, it's like if you can get past that first line of defense, there's like it may not be as like substantially built on the back end because they do have to give their employees like some level of degree and autonomy to get work done, and they're split. And if you're in there, you're trusted, right? You're supposed to be trusted. So like,
how you see, yeah, and you sort of see it through the whole spectrum, right? Like I know that sort of for us, right, we're a little bit more nascent of an organization, but like we are consistently educating specifically new onboarding employees, right? Like the CEO is never going to text you asking for a gift card, right? But you have to sort of put yourself in the headspace of that new employee, and you're really excited, right? It's your first week of work, and you get this text from a number in an area code of the headquarters of your office. It's like, hey, this is Mike. Can you please go get me some, gift cards? And I can understand, especially that new employee in an effort to, try and make a good impression, right? They're going to very, very quickly go buy those things. And it sort of, it covers the whole spectrum. So it always comes back to like, when was the last time, we used to make fun of it in the Marine Corps, but like that annual training and that like just the constantly hitting it, right? Constantly getting back to, what are good PII and security practices, especially with, security information. It's just so easy to forget that, like you said, right? A lot of the time it's not some, shady hooded cloaked figure.
It's not some guy behind a computer screen. Yeah. In the dark.
No.
Like,
I think, and also, right, like I think that especially in the sort of like military veteran space, a lot of guys don't understand just how much of their information is publicly available and for sale, right? And like it's really easy to go grab a list on Zoom Info of Google employees in Texas or wherever, and you
That's
can
all
then
they
just
did
back
for
your way
this.
into that. Yeah, they literally used LinkedIn and Zoom Info.
So I actually last year, this is pretty creepy. And if you guys have USAA, if anyone listening has USAA, I would strongly encourage you to call them and ask for a passkey or like a verify app. So I got, there was 2 instances where this happened. The second, which I completely overhauled my USAA security just for my like checking account, right? So I get onto my Gmail and I had like probably 300 random emails, like subscriptions, signups, all from all over the world. And I was like, what in the world? And then I get this text from USAA that's like, hey, your password's been changed. The second time I knew what was happening, but what these people would do is they'll basically fill your entire inbox with crap so that you don't see an email from USAA. So I get this text from USAA saying that my email's been changed and my password's been changed. I can't get in. So I call USAA. I'm like, hey, someone's hacked into my account. And they're like, yeah, you called us to change your email. And it was 1 letter off. So instead of saying Fraser with an R, it was with 2 R's, right? So it looks very similar. And I asked them, like, how did that happen? And the person the first time was like, oh, we're not totally sure. Like, we'll change it back for you and we'll get you taken care of. A month later, same thing. This time, the person at USAA was like, oh, did you not get a call about someone calling us like in the last 2 days? There's been multiple calls trying to get into your account. And I was like, no. And they said, okay, yeah, the person that looks like they finally got, like the person that got in called had your car insurance number, your car VIN, and your birthday, and obviously your name. And I was like, okay, how does that happen? They said, well, probably what happened is when you went in to get your oil changed or something, they took your car info and they probably sold that. And they called, and I said, well, how can you get into my account with all, like, without anything else, right? All they had was my VIN and my car and my birthday and my name, which were probably in my glove box. And they said, well, they didn't know your branch of service, but they continued to ask. And it looks like a couple times they hung up, but they kept trying back. And eventually they found a person at USAA that was just like, okay, sir, we'll let you into your account. And they completely hacked my account. Luckily, no info was no money was taken or anything. And I got this pass key, but basically they just kept calling USAA until they got someone that would just let them in.
Right.
Pretty freaky. So anyway, change your security setting. But
yeah, all too familiar these days. Exactly. Yeah, get a Google. I'm gonna plug your product, Kyle. Get some Google Authenticator, man. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
It's good soup.
It is. And the
why should
passwords
you?
are important too. That passwords are gonna go away here in like 5 years.
Yeah.
So, JP, you work with physical security. I mean, you don't work. You're not like a bodyguard or anything. Zeroeyes.
We're in the security space. Yeah.
You're in the security space. One of the interesting things that happened here is that MGM decided to basically lose, the ransom that was demanded was $30 million, and they probably lost close to $100 million in lost earnings and reputational damage, but they decided not to pay it. And the CEO is pretty confident in that decision. The FBI says don't pay it, but still 30 to 40% of companies will just pay. And oftentimes the hackers will unfreeze. What's the controversy? Why should you? I mean, obviously, there's kind of some incentives issues. But what do you tell people? If there's a physical problem, how do you deal with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, certainly. We sort of have a whole team dedicated to sort of reputational risk, right? Duty of care. There's a real monetary cost to those types of things happening in your place of business, or on the physical grounds of your place of business. And so it's at the end of the day, right, it is a cultural and a leadership decision. But it goes back to, I think, one of the things that they were trying to do most importantly was sort of button up whatever type of vulnerabilities had been exposed. I don't have sort of any inside baseball, but if I were a gambling man in that space, I would bet that the vulnerability was a little bit bigger than was publicly reported. And so rather than just sort of eat the 30 million and take the L, they were like, we're going to let this thing marinate a little bit, and we're going to get a full capture and a full spread of the entire set of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and I think they also realized too that two things, that like they obviously couldn't trust these people because they had no qualms about getting into their systems and messing it up and then holding them hostage. And so if they paid it, like, were they going to fully leave? Would they leave something where they could come back like, well, these guys paid once, right? They're going to pay again.
Right.
So it's like, okay, like, screw it. Don't pay them anything. Don't make them think we'll pay. And just like, we're already screwed and damaged. So like, there's just too much, there's too much risk in not us fully kicking them out ourselves.
I actually laughed that one of the things that the digital intruders did was send an email with their demands, but the MGM employees shut down all internal emails and started to use paper notes because they were worried about them having access to the emails, right? So the CEO was like, hey, from now on, we're going to use couriers. So these hackers like sent their demands, and the CEO actually never even saw it because they stopped using email. So it was pretty funny that the hackers own
Even if they using email is an insane thing. It's like I mean, I guess it works too. Yeah, email's important, right? All the important stuff comes.
So it's kind of funny that like the hackers own tactics, worked against them. They couldn't even get in contact with the CEO. So Pretty crazy. Yeah, I mean, you talk to anyone that's in IT or cybersecurity, and they'll tell you it's like the Silicon Valley episode where they see the competitor's password on the sticky note,
Right.
and the whole episode's about how this guy thinks that he's like, that they're like grade A hackers, and in reality, it's just a sticky note with the password on it that the LPs of the VC fund had. So train up your people, because that's the number one vulnerability. So next, we're going to move into a little bit about valuation of Truth Social. But first, wanted to have JP have you talk a little bit about your experience right now at Zeroeyes. You're raising a Series B. You guys successfully raised a Series A few years ago. How does that work? How do people look at you, value you? What is the process like for a normal business? This is important for veterans to understand who either want to be entrepreneurs or want to work at an early stage company. What does it look like to raise a new round of funding? But obviously you'll need, the reason you obviously raise that funding is to grow, because you're probably not profitable yet. But how do companies evaluate you, and how does normal valuation work?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that when you look at the venture space specifically, right? I think that one of the things, unfortunately, that people get wrong is not every business is a venture business, right? So I think it's an interesting play right now, especially in the veteran entrepreneurship space. There's a lot of people that want to roll up a bunch of landscaping companies and call it a SaaS company and put a 20x clip on it and say that they're at a 9-figure startup, but that's not really true, right? So for venture, right, they're looking at sort of like enterprise level implementation. We're talking hundreds of thousands of users and revenues in the hundreds of millions or billions. So in order to get there, right, you need funding to get going. So I've been with Zeroeyes since 2020. Was a pretty early employee, so went through seed, Series A, and now we're gearing up for the B. And you sort of see at least what you're going to use the money for, right? So I think for us, obviously going to market, right, in 2020, we went to market in the K through 12 space, and no students were in class physically in 2020, right? So we had to sort of pivot our go-to-market strategy. But a little bit about what we do specifically, I guess, to give some context before we break down the funding part, is Zeroeyes is an AI weapons detection platform. So we use your existing security camera infrastructure, and we run AI on top of it in order to find and detect visible weapons, and then use that information to alert first responders, public safety officials, and security personnel inside the school or corporate campus. So because we're going to need to be on hundreds of thousands or millions of cameras, right? We needed to sort of pursue the venture path in order to make the business work, due to the cost of compute, the unit economics. In order to make the business run, we needed to raise capital. So we were super lucky to raise. I think we did like a $5 million seed, and then a $21 million A round in 2021, and sort of now gearing up for a Series B. And so, they're just sort of different phases. There's life cycles of these types of companies. And so, especially at startups, right, growth is potentially more important than profitability, which is why you need to raise outside funding to keep the business going.
Yeah, and what kind of stuff? I mean, you've seen the company kind of through a few of those phases. For the person that's just totally doesn't understand, but is totally new to this, why not just raise a gigantic seed round? Why do you want to continue to raise successive rounds rather than just one round?
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's like the MBA in me wants to talk about like cost of capital, right? But I think that sort of more foundationally, right? I think that if you can think of cash like jet fuel, right? You need cash to sort of accelerate the growth of the company, and you can get cash in one of two ways, right? You can get debt or equity. And so in order to not put long-term debt or financial burden on the business, one of the ways you can do that is through selling equity, right? Which is how you sort of proceed through the venture space. And so, yeah, I mean, like, why would you raise a monster seed round? Well, because potentially, right, at seed, you don't have product market fit, right? At seed, it's much more of an idea. And
But you
what
might not even have
investors,
sales. Yeah.
yeah, you might have zero revenue, right? You might be burning whatever, a couple $100,000 a month in engineers. And you know, our company is actually a spin out of from the innovation center at Wharton. So both Mike and Rob, our CEO and COO, are Wharton MBAs. So they use I think it's called the Pennovation Lab. So sort of a homegrown startup for you in the Philly space.
Yeah. They have the headquarters out here in Conshohocken, right?
Yeah, Conshohocken. Yeah. So and as far as like stage goes, right, I think that a metric that's used specifically in sort of the SaaS investing world. So SaaS would be software as a service. So in the SaaS space, one of the key metrics for investors is ARR per full-time employee. So like how much revenue does the business pull in for every full-time employee? And so those metrics, you know, are sort of publicly available to sort of give you some general sense. At Twitter, I think it's like 300 to 500K per employee, and then Facebook obviously is like 1.7 or 2 million of revenue per employee. And so in the seed and Series A stages, right, you're not going to be at those numbers, but you want to be sort of trending in that direction. So instead of focusing on headcount, right, you should be really probably focusing on top line revenue.
Yeah, people eventually will want to see you get profitable. Kyle, why would anyone invest in a this is something that a lot of vets and people that aren't in business kind of get amazed by. But why would an investor make an investment in an early stage company, and what's kind of the outsized economics that they're looking at?
I mean, you're getting in when it's cheap, right? So if you're able to buy when a company people generally look at like in terms of risk, right? Like what's the risk, right? And so the risk is extremely high that the company's not going to work out. And because the risk is high, the valuation is low, and you're able to buy a large percentage of the company, you know, for relatively cheap. And then the upside case is super high, right? So like maybe you make a small investment and the upside case is like 100x that investment. That may be something crazy. You don't know, right? And so it's a chance to like, I mean, it's just the entire like finance world is like super concerned about like how do they beat the market? Because like anybody can go and just invest in the market, right? And you'll get like whatever the percentage returns, but to really get that like real alpha where you're going to like outperform the market usually requires some like super, you know, innovative or risky like investments. And so it's a way to like expose your portfolio towards, you know, because I mean, there's like, I forget the name of it, but they showed in like business school, but it's like a portfolio that's been like mixed with like different investments.
Yeah, the efficient frontier, baby.
Yeah, outperforms like
Yeah,
outperform, which but at the same time they also say it's hard to beat the market too. So like I don't know how you square both.
yeah. Our investment management class ended with the guy saying, "Put all your money in the S&P."
Yeah, but he's like, but also at the same time, you know, you could, you know, if you have a mixed investment profile, you'll be better. But also just put it in an index fund. So this is why I'm not a VC.
Yeah, and it gets a little bit into sort of like correlation as well. So typically, right, like let's say that you're CalPERS, right, and you have this enormous multi-billion-dollar pension
CalPERS
fund.
is the California Public Employee Retirement System. So the pensions of California public employees, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's an enormous portfolio, right? Because it's a defined benefit program, right? And so they're looking at like they have to generate current income as a percentage of their portfolio. And so one of the ways that they're able to do that and potentially, you know, mitigate some risk is deploy capital in different markets. So I think that's a little bit of the like more buttoned up financial answer as for why they would want exposure to venture or private equity. But another thing that I think a lot of people don't discuss is like, you know, let's say that you're your MBS, right? And you have this like enormous amount of cash and you're trying to divest from oil. It's also kind of fun to put on your investor hat and say, go deploy a $2 billion fund, which is, you know, 20 bips of the overall fund. And then you can go write these, you know, $10, $100 million checks. And if one of them 100X is, well, you know, 100X on 100 million is quite an outsized return, right? So I think there's a lot of the sort of like non-monetary benefits that go along with being a VC outside of just the Patagonia vest and putting it in your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. So certainly, I mean, most VCs, most of the time when I talk to people that are coming into MBA programs and they're like, oh, you know, I'm thinking about VC. I'll tell them, like, go talk to VCs and ask them, A, what their day-to-day is like, and B, what most VCs make. What you'll find is day-to-day for a lot of VCs, if you're not a top tier venture capital firm, is sorting through a lot of just crap in the market. And B, takes a while to make money as a VC unless you raise a really, really big fund. So most VCs will get, you know, something like a 2 and 20, meaning they get a 2% management fee. So if you raise $1 billion fund, you get a 2% management fee. So you get $20 million per year, just paid to you. And then you get a 20% of the equity pot, right? So if you don't raise a big fund, like say you see a VC and they have like a $50 million fund on a 2 and 20, they're basically making $1 million. They have to cover overhead, office costs, everything. You're probably like not making all that much money, right? Unless you're at a very, very big fund. So that's something to remember for those that are thinking, oh, I want to be a VC. Like, go talk to VCs, go actually kind of like do the math. Takes a while to get paid out. But
and also, like, just so I can jump in there, right? I think that's an interesting, because I hear that too, right? And certainly, right, I think that there was a moment in time where I was like, man, you know, I think I could go be a VC, I could go be an investor, but it's one of those things where, like, potentially, what is the value add, and like, why would you put a VC on your cap table unless they are sort of accretive to your organization? And I struggle, and I'm not trying to sort of hurt egos here, but I struggle with what the value of a 25-year-old Wharton MBA is to at an accretive level, right? To, like, let's say sort of a, you know, a B2B SaaS product. I don't know exactly what value you're going to be bringing there on the table. And so it actually may be a better experience, at least at 25, to go be inside a portfolio company and either learn a vertical, right? Or learn horizontally of like a whole sort of industry, and then potentially, right, move up market from the capital allocator, from sort of like the labor or knowledge work. But yeah, I think a lot of people want to sort of skip that rung on the ladder, and they want to move straight from an MBA to capital allocator without any sort of like operational chops inside of an organization.
Yeah, the best VCs generally have a background in an industry that's pretty lengthy. But anyway, this leads us to talk about the craziest
DJT, baby.
DJT. So Kyle, how much DJT did you buy, and where's it going?
I don't buy stocks anymore. I buy options.
So how many options did you buy in the DJT? What is this? We're kind of jumping around, but what is DJT? What's going on with this?
DJT is the IPO of the SPAC company DWAC, which is like digital. I don't even know what it stands for, but basically
it's like Trump's digital media company.
Yeah, it's basically the SPAC that merged with Trump's Truth Social to, like, you know, give this thing like some more money.
And you do a SPAC. It's basically an IPO, but it's like way less regulated.
It's a company in search of a business model.
Right.
It's like, hey, we're just going to IPO an entity, and based off the strength of the management team or whatever lunacy is behind it, it'll have a valuation, and they'll go and find a company to buy or found. It should probably be illegal.
It hasn't done well. Most SPACs have performed very poorly.
Yeah. But yeah, so they IPO'd, and so now, you know, it's floating in the market. What does the latest news say? Trump media stock raises all gains since it began trading as DJT. Shares fell another 11% on Monday.
So this is Truth Social. I've seen Truth Social a lot, because that's the only, and this kind of gets to maybe the value. That's the only medium that Trump uses to digitally communicate, right?
Yeah, he doesn't. Yeah, so once he got kicked off Twitter, I think he's posted like a little bit on Instagram, but like once he got kicked off Twitter, he pretty much, and Facebook, he got kicked off everything, right? And so then he started Truth Truth Social. You should call it Trump Social. Truth Social. And yeah, and that's pretty much, how he communicates. And, all the media companies did his bidding, and they would post it on, like, Trump said on Truth Social. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's what he's doing. So it seems like it's probably going to make him about $5 billion. The reason being that they're going to suspend some of the laws or some of the rules that normally govern freeze outs. So if you IPO, the management team can't immediately sell, right? You can't liquidate your shares like the day of.
They can't pump and dump. Yeah, I mean, it said he was contractually barred from selling or even borrowing against the shares for 6 months. So, like, if you have shares, you can use them as collateral.
Right, and they think that they might have a board of loyalists that basically says, like, hey, you're now allowed to do that, right? And he can liquidate for probably around $5 billion. So he'll make about $5 billion. And it had a $53 million net loss. So JP, this is a company that's worth billions of dollars.
Not financial advice.
Not financial advice. Yeah, none of this being financial advice. But how does a company that has almost no revenue and $53 million in net losses get a $1 billion valuation?
So sort of one of the ways that you can sort of napkin math a business is you can sort of put a multiple on top line revenue, right? Typically in the SaaS space, historically, right, we've seen multiples at anywhere between 12 and 25 times top line revenue or sales. That's sort of like healthy valuations. So I was a Marine, right? I don't like to do public math, so let's use like ones and tens, right? So let's say this business does 100 million in sales. They get a 15x multiple on their business. So the enterprise value of that business would be 1.5 billion. What we see with Truth Social is something a little bit more sort of divorced from reality, which is on 4 million in sales, a $9 billion valuation, which is something like a 2,500 clip multiple. But I think the reason why people are buying it, right, and the reason why it has risen in valuation is I think this is sort of a direct departure from the prevailing narrative and how disenfranchised Trump voters can potentially find a way to, inadvertently or indirectly support their candidate. Is they say, hey, if we all continue, in the sort of GameStop Reddit meme craze, if we all just don't sell this thing, potentially, right, he's able to get some exit liquidity on a product that, like you said, right, produced a net loss of $50 million. So I think it's way more of that. And me personally wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, but that's sort of where we landed at valuation wise.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like the at one point you want to be like, market fundamentals matter, yada yada yada, But the other thing, you look at like Bitcoin was what 60,000. So I don't know like what that's an indicator of, other than, I think it's hard to say that fundamentals underpin some portion of the market, and there is right. Like, yeah, I think you hit it exactly. And it's just been this splintering in the past few years of people like, oh, I only buy Black Rifle coffee, and I only I only support these brands because they support my political beliefs, right? And so then you can now do this via proxy way in the stock.
It's basically it's a campaign donation that has like an outsized effect, right?
Yeah,
it's like, hey, we're gonna pay. There's a feeling amongst a lot of people that like, hey, this the legal cases against Trump, the the general sentiment is unfair, and this is the way that I'm able to fight back against that, right? I can pay Trump's legal bills. If he liquidates for $5 billion, yes, whether you like him or you hate him, like that's a pretty it's a pretty big pot. I mean, he'd be able to fund his campaign many times over and his legal bills and emerge wealthier than he did before. And, I think especially with this bond that he just put up, right? People kind of started to feel like, wow, you know, when the judge said like $450 million was the amount, and everyone was
Yeah.
like, even people that hated him, like Mark Cuban, were like, yeah, that's insane. Like, that's stupid. They came back down, right? And he used cash, but I think you're totally right, JP.
Dude, the legal system has just done him like so many favors. Like I know it's like they've made him just such a martyr. It's
Yeah.
truly like,
It's the reason he's the nominee.
yeah. I
Oh,
don't
100%. Yeah.
I think that's a controversial thing to say. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
I go back to I can't remember who said it, but I heard it's sort of from you know, ancient Rome, but it's a quote from a poet, Juvenal, and he said, already long ago, from when we sold our vote to no man, the people have abdicated our duties. For the people who once upon a time handed out military command, high civil office, and legions now restrain itself anxiously and hopes for just two things: bread and circuses. And I think that he is the king of bread and circuses.
Yeah.
yeah.
I totally agree.
That's
I
all
mean, he
people want,
knows-
right? I think that, you know, when you talk to, and not to get, you know, terribly political, right? But when you see people today, they feel a little bit of more of a crunch in their wallet, and they feel like there is a little bit less of this, you know, social mobility here in America, right? We're moving sort of further apart on the spectrum when it comes to wealth equality. I think that people are okay, right? As long as they have something to eat and something to watch. I think that people generally are sort of down with the sickness and along for the ride. And, you know, he is a master at that.
I mean, it's like our friend Kyle and I have a friend that's like pretty liberal, part of the SITREPs team. He's like, I hate this guy, but like, damn, is he not funny? Which is true. I mean, anyone that watches him is like he should have been a stand-up comedian. One of my friends
Trump's
was
an
like,
entertainer for sure.
if you could have made the Truman Show and just like put him in it and not told him that it wasn't real, like it would have been really entertaining, and you could have like run the presidential campaign elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens in November, but this could legitimately like bankroll his entire campaign. Again, this campaign will be weird because I don't know how much money matters, because everyone knows both candidates really well.
Right.
You don't really need, Trump doesn't need to like get his name out. I don't know if anyone will change their opinion about Trump between now and November, but yeah, we're gonna.
You know, if you were to say one thing that, and I've like kind of made this argument, I'd say like if you looked at the valuation of Trump, of Truth Social, it is crazy, but it is not as crazy when you think about the fact that if Trump wins the election, right, for 4 years, he's not going to use Twitter, because Twitter is going to make money.
He might not even do press conferences.
And so like how many users, like, which is just crazy. It's like another way to like use the presidency to like enrich himself. Like, it's just insane, right?
Yeah, he could even say like, I'm not going to do press conferences. Like, I'm going to do
I'm
live
only going to do it on
streams.
Truth Social. And
Yeah.
like, nobody can fucking stop him. Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
What fucking do about it, right? And
Yeah.
and so if you're looking at like an actual upside case that's attached to fundamentals, like that is the one I would make. That if he wins, like it looks like he's going to win, start buying call options on Truth Social, because you're going to like.
Yeah, the volume on it is just insane. Again, you talk about Kyle the professional options trader, but
Yeah.
I you know, some deep out of the money, calls might be prudent.
I mean, it's literally a bet. It's like if you go to the casino and be like, all right, I'm putting money on black, or spin a roulette wheel. But that would be the actual case to make for it.
So there we have it. We had a good discussion here. One final thing we want to talk about is just a brief discussion for those vets listening, trying to get out and figure out where they want to go. Kyle, you're in what people would colloquially call big tech. JP, you're on the other end working in kind of security tech, right? Is what you could call it. Certainly in tech, but very early stage. JP, what's the benefit of working at an early stage small tech company Maybe what are some downsides for vets that are thinking, man, I want to get out. I'm trying to figure out what to do. I want to work in tech.
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, so I thought about it in sort of two ways. So I got out in the middle of COVID, so it was also kind of an odd transition timeline. But I knew that I wanted to stay in Hawaii, right? And so I would sort of start for all people thinking about entering into the technology space, whether big tech or startups. I'd say like sort of start with your non-negotiables, and then don't sort of waver from those, right? So for me, the non-negotiable was I wanted to stay in Hawaii. And that was when I sort of realized that I was going to need to pursue or want to pursue some more early stage stuff. Why? So bull case for joining an early stage company, definitely the ability to learn, because due to the nature of sort of a small startup, right, they need much more, we'll call them general purpose players than experts, right? Like a lot of the time you just need people to do stuff, right? So in the early stages, I was customer support, I was help desk, I was sales, I was operations. Like everyone does everything inside of a startup at that early stage, right? And then another sort of on the other end of that is an opportunity to earn, right? And so I think that when it comes to equity grants and ability to, potentially upon either an IPO or a liquidity event, be able to earn an outsized, call it deferred compensation, that's where you should sort of move further left on the maturity of your company. Whereas obviously, Kyle can speak to being at a publicly traded big company and what those sort of stock or equity grants may look like. I was excited about having a vested interest in being able to increase the value of the company myself, because when I joined, I think there were like 17 or 18 full-time employees, and so I knew, right, that if I made something better, I would have made a much larger impact as a percentage of the pie. Whereas if you're sort of employee 100,001 at Microsoft, your value, the things that you're doing every day, may not be as accretive to the enterprise value.
So what's the downside? That's a pretty solid endorsement. I'm ready to.
Yeah, it goes to zero, dude. Right? It goes to zero, right? Like you work 4 years and all this equity, 3% of zero is zero, right? Yeah. So like
for those listening, Zeroeyes shows no signs of going to zero. Just so people are aware.
Yeah. So what's great, right, is you can also look, and one of the things that I didn't look at, which I would highly suggest veterans to look at, is sort of your chance of the mortality rate of your company, right, should go down as you hit fundraising rounds. So like the mortality rate on a sort of series, like a seed stage startup, is like 85%, right? Like 85% of those companies are not going to raise a Series A. And then when you go from A to B, right, it's like 50%. And then sort of after B, the mortality rate of those companies typically drops below 25 or 30%. So there's an enormous gap between sort of, Series A, Series B, and then, huge legacy established enterprise businesses. And that's also another thing that I think that vets should really take a look at is, so obviously, right, Zeroeyes is on the smaller scale. We're like young in our growth cycle, right? So we started in 2018, went to market in 2019. And so we've only been doing this for, 4 or 5 years. However, there are, if you look at Stripe, right? Stripe is the most richly valued privately held startup. And technically we can still call Stripe a startup, and it's worth like $100 billion, right? So there's an enormous spectrum when it comes to working at a startup. And I think that depending on, again, whatever your sort of risk tolerance is, or what types of skills you're trying to develop inside that organization, you can sort of pick a company at a maturity level that fits that profile.
Yeah, when you talk about Stripe, our friend Troy Peterson is anxiously awaiting their IPO. They're a $100 billion company, and it's difficult. I mean, you can't just there's no open market to go sell your startup shares, right? So if you don't,
it's crazy they haven't IPO'd yet. I'm sure they have their reasons, and they're all well explained if somebody were to sit me down and explain it. But
a lot of people holding on to
I think there is some
Equity.
secondary places you can sell your shares.
Yeah, there's like Hive.
There's a few.
I was chirping somebody on LinkedIn the other day because they were
It's
like,
difficult though.
there were some Anduril shares out there, and I was just kind of someone is like, oh, I'm an early stage investor, and they're like buying shares of Anduril on Hive at like 3x. So, but like you said, there's huge barriers to entry to buying stocks on the secondary market.
And it's difficult. The transparency isn't there. You might be buying a company whose stock is going to go to zero. It's like the market's just not like, there's not a lot of liquidity, right? It's going to be difficult.
Yep.
So, yeah, a lot of people looking. So Kyle, why should a vet look at big tech? What's the benefit there?
So these big, big tech's a great place, I think. There's a lot of similarities, at least from my perspective, on what, and I'm just saying this as like somebody, this isn't like Google's position. This is just my view as somebody who works there, right? And is a veteran. Huge, complex organizations. There's a lot of like internal mobility here, right? Like you can you can build a career here across like a wide range of things. Like, like JP is like, oh yeah, you're going to be like firefighting and doing like a million different things here, right? Like at a company like Google, you can like develop like a specific set of like, functional expertise, right? And doing like a role. And then you can like look, hey, where else do I want to go in the company? And you can like find ways to like advocate for yourself and like grow, like guide your career in a way that, you may not have at a smaller company because the company's just smaller,
Sure.
right? They're not going to have like these huge product areas or teams or like all these different, like everything they've got. And it's like, it's obviously coming in as great benefits, right? There's some extremely smart people here. You learn from like industry, you kind of get to see a lot of like best in class stuff. Has like a lot of international mobility options, right? So like you just have, it's more, there's just more time for you to kind of like, hey, we're going to focus on our career, and you got some great benefits to support you, and you just have a lot of options within the organization, as opposed to, I think, at a startup where it could be like more insecure, more dynamic, more like less structured, and some people would thrive in that if you're able to handle that like level of risk in an environment like that. But yeah, I mean, they're both great options, right?
Yeah, to advocate sort of for Kyle's position, right? I think that like, especially in the transitioning veteran space, it can be like a really solid bridge, because that's such a tumultuous time to you anyway. Like, I know sort of spiritually or like metaphysically, right? Like you don't really find that personality back until probably 24, 36 months after you leave the service. And so trying to embed all of that professional change on top of such a wild transformation as it is to sort of transition from active duty, going to a place that's like well established, well resourced, right? Like there is no job at Google that has like never been done before, right? Whereas if you were going to sort of further left on the growth maturity stages, like you may be the first product guy at your company, and so you're trying to like write all of this procedure and process, and like it can be just like much more stressful and more iterative. Whereas at a big tech opportunity, right, you'll be sort of following more of an established procedure or guidance. So just your mileage may vary, and I think that like in that space, I don't think a lot of people do a good enough job of sort of giving nuanced perspectives based on where that person is in their life. Like, dude, if you're married and you have a mortgage and you have 3 kids and you're 37 and you're like a transitioning, major lieutenant colonel, may not be the right opportunity for you to join a seed level company, because it potentially could go to zero and like you have to pay your mortgage and your kids are in school. And like, that's really stressful, right?
Yeah. It's like your risk tolerance and just like how much career support do you think you're going to need? Like, I'm sure there are people out there who would be able to do that transition, right? And they'd be able to like own everything. But like the vast majority of vets I've talked to usually need like more career support. But but that's to say, like the job I'm in at Google is not one I would want to stick even like a new MBA in, or a transitioning veteran. Like it's a job that I've, I feel like you definitely need some seasoning on you because the kind of like level of like performance and expectation is high enough. Because like your coworkers have a lot of like they're not like fresh MBAs or whatever. Like they're all people who've like worked at prior tech companies. You know, like they're all people who have like a lot of experience in that.
Yeah. To preview what we're going to talk about next week, the Taiwan semiconductor company, their founder was like 45 or 50, and he built $1 billion company. And it was the article in the Wall Street Journal that most founders are not, in fact, 21-year-olds in their dorm rooms. The average successful founder is like 45 or 50.
Yeah, they have experience, they have professionalism, they have a network, they can they know how to raise money, or they're confident enough too, right? And they have like the background where people will be like, okay, like I feel like your chance is better than most.
Yeah.
I saw that in my last company I worked at Acme, right? Like the founders were in their 50s or like late 40s, early 50s, right? And they just were very professional. They knew how to do this sort of stuff, right? Which I think like may not be true like across the spectrum if you're in your 20s or even early 30s trying to start a company.
Yeah, I go back like when I was getting out, like I thought that I had it all figured out, and you just realize that you actually have very I think you said, Kyle, somebody said like, dude, just because you served doesn't mean that you have a monopoly on hard work. And there are like a lot of people who have spent the last 5 years while you were, for me, right, like driving trucks and shooting guns. Like there were people that were reading P&Ls and actually working inside of a business, like you said, developing functional expertise in that organization that are 2 years your junior. So I just think, or just
like in industry expertise, right? Like they can kind of, they hear the music of the industry in a way that you're not. Like when I was a pilot, like one of the things about being a pilot, right, is they're very big on flight time. How much flight time you have is a big indicator of how experienced you are. And so like you could be an exceptionally talented pilot at 250, 500 hours, but like the air sense that you develop of just like listening to the radio and knowing what's going on, and like a really, a complicated changing like dynamic, system of rules and, aircraft, right? Like, you drive down the highway, but it's like way more complicated, and just understanding what's going on in the giant system. And then like all the things that like affect your plane and everything, that only develops after like a certain number of hours, right? Of just knowing like just knowing what to do, that like intuition, and understanding like, in a stressful like life or death situation, right? Like you kill somebody very easily, and you can kill yourself very easily in aviation, right? In almost the same way, it's almost like kind of you like the founder stuff. Like, yeah, you could have somebody who's like really talented, but they don't have that air sense yet. Yeah, right. And it's like you only develop it after so long. So, but
it's always funny seeing these vets that oftentimes just retreat back to being experts on civilian transitions when they themselves have never made them. It's kind of a problem.
Like pontificate on like what a career looks like when it's like
they've been out
working at like an organization, right? That, whether it's like a well-funded startup or like a really big one, like that experience shouldn't be discounted, because you have to like know how to negotiate all that stuff and deal with it, and deal with like complex situations and like ups and downs with it. That unless you've worked in that job, you just wouldn't know, right? But it's fun to pontificate about it if you've never done it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much to JP for coming on. This isn't the last conversation.
Really enjoyed it.
So
yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Next week, won't be as exciting because Kyle won't have a new software update, nor will there be an eclipse. So back to the dull life of I guess you still have your full self-driving for the month, right?
Oh yeah. So don't worry. Well, I like, honestly, if I don't like take a bunch of videos of it and use it for content, like I probably shouldn't be.
Are you gonna how much is it to buy the full subscription? Is it like $300 a month or something?
I haven't looked into it. I think it's like $12,000 to just buy it outright, or it's like $200 a month.
Yeah, what's the number there? I feel like $300 a month that's like free, right? $10 a day to not have to drive.
Yeah, but I don't know.
You still have to like touch the wheel though, right? Like it's
I-
not like you can just sit back.
It feels like, and so like when the car is like basic like driving assist or whatever, where you like put it in a road, you turn it on, it'll hold down, it'll hold like speed, it'll hold your distance, it'll hold you in the lines, it'll even like make like good, like if you're going like a windy road, it'll hold it very well. That thing is always bugging you to like touch it like every 15 seconds. I want to say in the full self-driving thing, since I've had it, it is much less frequent. Like it is not bugging you every 15 seconds to like kind of like move the wheel,
Touch the wheel or something. Yeah.
I'd probably say it's something like on the order of like every couple minutes. It's asking you to just verify. The other thing it does have though is in the car, inside the car. There's a camera, and I think the camera is looking at your eyes, and it can tell if you're not looking at like down the road. Because if you like do this for too long, it'll like bark at you, or if you start messing on your phone, it'll also start barking at you, and it'll disengage the autopilot. So it's like you do kind of have to kind of just like sit there and like take it. But I would say it's like way less mentally taxing because you're not having to like do all the like when I was in a pilot, like the big thing about being a pilot when they like introduced like the Mike model Black Hawk, right, which is basically like the Tesla of like Black Hawks, it would fly itself, was that it will reduce your mental workload so you won't be as tired driving. And I think like if I was to think of like the biggest pro for that is like, yeah, you literally probably be less tired during the day getting to and from work because you're not having to make all these decisions that are tiring.
That's the dream long term, right? Is that your commute now turns into just the last hour in the office.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. It's pretty impressive, but yeah, I don't know. I haven't decided if I'm gonna do it or not. Maybe talk to you in a month. But
well, this will be a weekly thing. We can have updates. But anyway, gentlemen, JP, go enjoy the Hawaiian sunset. Kyle, hope you have a great night. The aftermath of the eclipse isn't too tiring. You can get to bed.
Yeah. We say a hui ho out here, so a hui ho. See you guys later.
A hui ho.
And I'm not talking about some $400,000 a year working Wall Street stiff flying first class and being comfortable. I'm talking about liquid. Rich enough to have your own jet. Rich enough not to waste time.